On any given night in cities across the developed world, hundreds of thousands of people have no place to call home. They sleep in doorways, under bridges, in emergency shelters, or in their cars. This is not a distant problem confined to developing nations or a relic of the past. It is a contemporary crisis unfolding on the streets of some of the world's wealthiest cities. From Los Angeles to London, from Sydney to Seattle, the homelessness crisis has reached unprecedented levels, challenging our collective conscience and testing the moral foundations of modern society. The sight of encampments sprawling across public parks, individuals sleeping on subway grates for warmth, and families living out of vehicles has become disturbingly commonplace. What was once viewed as an exceptional circumstance affecting a small, vulnerable population has evolved into a systemic failure that impacts communities of all sizes. The statistics are staggering, but behind each number is a human being with a story, a history, and often a series of circumstances that spiraled beyond their control. This crisis did not emerge overnight. It is the culmination of decades of policy decisions, economic shifts, and social changes that have eroded the safety nets designed to protect the most vulnerable members of society. Rising housing costs, stagnant wages, cuts to social services, deinstitutionalization of mental health care, and the opioid epidemic have converged to create a perfect storm. The COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbated these conditions, pushing millions to the brink of economic collapse and revealing the fragility of housing security for a significant portion of the population. Understanding the homelessness crisis requires looking beyond individual circumstances to examine the structural inequalities and systemic failures that perpetuate it. It demands that we confront uncomfortable truths about wealth distribution, access to opportunity, and the value we place on human dignity. This analysis explores the multiple dimensions of the homelessness crisis, from its historical roots to its devastating human impact, from the limitations of current responses to the transformative potential of community-based solutions. Ultimately, it asks a fundamental question. What kind of society do we want to be? And are we willing to make the changes necessary to ensure that everyone has a safe place to call home? Scale of the crisis. The magnitude of homelessness in contemporary society is both shocking and difficult to quantify with precision. Official counts consistently underestimate the true scale of the problem, as they typically measure only those who are literally without shelter on a given night, missing the vast population of people who are precariously housed, couch surfing, living in overcrowded conditions, or staying temporarily with friends and family. Nevertheless, even conservative estimates paint a disturbing picture. In the United States alone, the Department of Housing and Urban Development's annual point-in-time count has documented over 650,000 people experiencing homelessness on a single night, with this number showing an alarming upward trend in recent years after a period of decline. California accounts for nearly 30% of the nation's homeless population, with Los Angeles County reporting more than 75,000 homeless individuals, a crisis so severe that it has prompted declarations of public health emergencies. Cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and New York have seen their homeless populations surge, with visible encampments becoming fixtures of the urban landscape. The composition of the homeless population reveals troubling patterns. Approximately 40% are unsheltered, living on streets, in vehicles, or in makeshift encampments without access to the most basic facilities. Families with children represent one of the fastest growing segments, accounting for roughly 30% of the homeless population. This means that on any given night, more than 100,000 children in the United States do not have a stable place to sleep, a reality that carries profound implications for their development, education, and future opportunities. Young people aged 18 to 24 represent another vulnerable group, with many aging out of foster care systems without adequate support or transitioning from juvenile detention facilities into homelessness. LGBTQ+ youth are disproportionately represented in homeless populations, often forced onto the streets due to family rejection or discrimination. Veterans, despite targeted federal programs, still comprise a significant portion of the homeless population, with estimates suggesting that 1 in 10 homeless adults has served in the military. Internationally, the crisis is equally severe. In the United Kingdom, official statistics indicate that more than 270,000 people are homeless, with rough sleeping increasing by 165% over the past decade. Australia has seen similar trends, with over 116,000 people experiencing homelessness on census night, a figure that has steadily risen despite economic growth. Even in countries with robust social safety nets like Canada and Germany, homelessness has become an increasingly visible urban problem. The economic costs of homelessness are staggering. Studies have shown that allowing people to remain homeless is actually more expensive than providing them with housing and supportive services. Emergency room visits, hospitalizations, law enforcement interactions, incarceration, and emergency shelter operations create a revolving door that costs taxpayers billions annually. One study in Los Angeles found that each chronically homeless person costs the county approximately $50,000 per year in emergency services, compared to roughly $20,000 per year to provide permanent supportive housing. Beyond the numbers, the geographic spread of homelessness has changed dramatically. While historically concentrated in major urban centers, homelessness has increasingly spread to suburban and even rural areas. Smaller cities and towns that once believed themselves immune to such problems now find themselves grappling with encampments, overwhelmed shelters, and residents sleeping in their vehicles in shopping center parking lots. This geographic expansion reflects the broader economic pressures affecting communities of all sizes. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed just how precarious housing security is for millions of additional households. Eviction moratoriums and emergency rental assistance programs prevented what many feared would be a tsunami of homelessness. But as these protections expired, the delayed wave began to materialize. The pandemic also highlighted the deadly consequences of homelessness, as those without shelter faced impossibly high infection rates and mortality due to their inability to isolate, access health care, or maintain basic hygiene. Perhaps most concerning is the evidence that homelessness is becoming more entrenched and prolonged. The average length of time people remain homeless has increased, and the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness, defined as being continuously homeless for a year or more, or experiencing 4 episodes in 3 years, has risen substantially. This chronicity is driven by a combination of factors: the severity of the affordable housing shortage, the complexity of needs among the homeless population, and the inadequacy of available interventions. The scale of the crisis is also evident in the strain placed on the nonprofit organizations and public agencies attempting to address it. Emergency shelters operate at or beyond capacity year-round in most major cities. Wait lists for subsidized housing stretch for years, with some municipalities halting new applications altogether due to the futility of lists containing tens of thousands of names. Outreach workers are overwhelmed. Case managers carry unsustainable caseloads, and the network of services designed to help people exit homelessness has become primarily a system for managing homelessness rather than ending it. The crisis has reached a scale that demands recognition as a defining social challenge of our time, comparable in scope and moral urgency to other great social movements of the past. It represents a fundamental failure of housing policy, economic systems, and social solidarity. The question is no longer whether homelessness is a significant problem, but whether society has the political will to implement solutions commensurate with the scale of the crisis. History of inequality. The homelessness crisis cannot be understood without examining the deep historical roots of economic inequality that have shaped contemporary society. The conditions that produce mass homelessness are not natural or inevitable. They are the product of specific policy choices, economic structures, and social priorities that have evolved over decades and, in some cases, centuries. The foundation of modern economic inequality was laid during the Industrial Revolution, when the transition from agrarian to industrial economies created new forms of wealth accumulation and new categories of poverty. The concentration of capital in the hands of industrialists, the commodification of labor, and the rapid urbanization that pulled workers from rural areas into cities created the first modern homeless populations. 19th-century cities teemed with workers living in squalid conditions, with homelessness a constant feature of industrial capitalism's boom and bust cycles. The Great Depression of the 1930s brought homelessness to unprecedented levels, with millions of Americans losing their homes, farms, and livelihoods. The response to this crisis, the New Deal, represented a fundamental reorientation of government's role in ensuring economic security. Social security, unemployment insurance, public housing programs, and labor protections were established, creating a social safety net designed to prevent the most extreme forms of poverty and housing insecurity. For several decades following World War II, this framework, combined with strong economic growth, unionization, and relatively progressive taxation, produced a period of declining inequality and widespread housing security. However, beginning in the 1970s, a series of economic and political shifts began to reverse these gains. The neoliberal economic policies that came to dominance in the United States under Reagan and in the United Kingdom under Thatcher fundamentally altered the relationship between government, markets, and social welfare. Tax cuts heavily favoring the wealthy, deregulation of industries, weakening of labor unions, and reductions in social spending initiated a decades-long transfer of wealth upward. The gap between the richest and poorest members of society, which had narrowed during the mid-20th century, began to widen again, eventually reaching levels not seen since the Gilded Age. The impact of these policies on housing has been particularly devastating. Federal investment in affordable housing was slashed, with new construction of public housing essentially ceasing by the 1990s. The voucher-based Section 8 program that replaced construction programs has consistently been underfunded, serving only about 1 in 4 eligible households. At the same time, the private housing market became increasingly oriented toward higher-end development, with market forces failing to produce adequate housing for lower-income households. Deinstitutionalization of mental health care, which began in the 1960s and accelerated through the 1980s, provides another crucial historical context. While well-intentioned, mental institutions were often horrific places. The closing of state psychiatric hospitals was not accompanied by the promised development of community-based mental health services. Tens of thousands of people with serious mental illness were released from institutions with nowhere to go and no adequate system of care in place. Many ended up on the streets, forming the nucleus of what would become the modern chronic homelessness population. The war on drugs, initiated in the 1970s and massively expanded in the 1980s and 1990s, has had profound effects on housing stability. Mass incarceration has disrupted millions of families, with the United States imprisoning a larger proportion of its population than any other nation. The collateral consequences of criminal convictions, barriers to employment, exclusion from public housing, loss of voting rights, have created a permanent underclass of people for whom housing stability becomes nearly impossible. The racial disparities in this system, with Black and Latino Americans incarcerated at vastly higher rates than whites for similar offenses, have perpetuated and exacerbated historical patterns of racial inequality in housing. Indeed, the history of racial inequality is inseparable from the story of housing insecurity. Slavery, followed by Jim Crow laws, followed by explicitly discriminatory housing policies like redlining, created a systematic denial of wealth-building opportunities for Black Americans. The GI Bill, which helped millions of white Americans purchase homes after World War II, was effectively denied to black veterans through discriminatory implementation. Federal Housing Administration policies explicitly promoted racial segregation and refused to insure mortgages in predominantly black neighborhoods. The effects of these policies compound across generations. Homeownership is the primary mechanism of wealth accumulation for middle-class Americans, and the historical denial of homeownership to communities of color has created racial wealth gaps that directly contribute to disparities in homelessness rates. The financialization of housing represents another critical historical development. Housing has increasingly been treated as an investment vehicle and financial asset, rather than primarily as shelter. Real estate investment trusts, REITs, private equity firms, and foreign investors have purchased residential properties as speculative investments, driving up prices and treating housing as a commodity to extract maximum returns from rather than a human necessity. This shift has been particularly pronounced since the 2008 financial crisis, when investors purchased distressed properties at low prices, contributing to a housing recovery that has been characterized by rising prices but declining ownership rates and affordability. The 2008 financial crisis itself revealed the fragility of housing security for millions of families. Predatory lending, particularly targeting communities of color, resulted in millions of foreclosures. Many families lost not only their homes, but their life savings, falling from home ownership into precarious renting situations or outright homelessness. The crisis demonstrated how housing had become deeply entangled with financial speculation and how vulnerable households were to the resulting instability. Throughout this history, inequality has been reinforced and justified through ideology. The persistent myth of meritocracy, the belief that economic outcomes are determined primarily by individual effort and talent, obscures the structural barriers and systemic advantages that shape who succeeds and who struggles. This ideology facilitates victim-blaming narratives about homelessness, attributing housing insecurity to personal failings rather than recognizing it as a predictable outcome of inequality and policy choices. The intergenerational transmission of advantage and disadvantage ensures that inequality, once established, perpetuates itself. Children born into wealth have access to better education, healthcare, nutrition, and opportunities, while children born into poverty face obstacles at every stage of development. The stress of economic insecurity affects brain development. Academic achievement suffers in under-resourced schools, and the absence of family wealth means no safety net when crises occur. These childhood experiences shape adult outcomes, including the likelihood of experiencing homelessness. This history demonstrates that the homelessness crisis is not an aberration or a temporary disruption, but rather a manifestation of deep structural inequalities that have been deliberately constructed and maintained through policy choices. Understanding this history is essential to recognizing that addressing homelessness requires not just providing services to individuals, but confronting and transforming the systems that produce inequality and housing insecurity on such a massive scale. On Christmas Eve, 1895, in the remote mountains of western North Carolina, an impossibility became reality. George Washington Vanderbilt II opened the doors of Biltmore House, a 250-room French Renaissance chateau that remains to this day the largest privately owned home in the United States. The completion of this architectural marvel represented not merely the culmination of 6 years of intensive construction, but the realization of an extraordinary vision that defied both geography and conventional American sensibilities. The story of Biltmore Estate encompasses far more than the construction of an opulent mansion. It is a narrative that spans more than 130 years, traversing the excesses of America's Gilded Age, the catastrophic challenges of 2 world wars, the collapse of an economic order during the Great Depression, and the profound transformation of American society throughout the 20th century. Against all odds, financial, social, and practical, Biltmore survived when virtually every comparable estate fell to demolition, subdivision, or institutional ownership. This comprehensive examination explores the complete saga of Biltmore, from George Vanderbilt's formative years and European education through the visionary design and construction process involving the era's greatest architects and landscape designers to the intimate details of daily life within its walls. We will investigate the intricate servant hierarchy that made such grandeur function, the love story that gave the estate new purpose, the financial realities that threatened its existence, and the innovative adaptations that ensured its survival into the modern era. The Biltmore story is fundamentally American, a tale of audacious ambition, inherited wealth confronting new realities, and the transformation of private excess into public heritage. It demonstrates how vision, determination, and strategic adaptation can preserve even the most improbable legacies. As we journey through more than a century of Biltmore's existence, we discover not just the history of a magnificent building, but a window into the evolution of American society itself, from the confident opulence of the 1890s to the complex realities of 21st century historic preservation. Part 1. Vision and Creation, 1888 to 1895. George Vanderbilt II, the quiet, intellectual billionaire George Washington Vanderbilt II, born on November 14, 1862 in New Dorp, Staten Island, New York, represented an anomaly within America's most famous industrial dynasty. As the youngest son of William Henry Vanderbilt and Maria Louisa Kissam, George inherited a fortune that would be worth billions in today's currency. Yet he possessed neither the aggressive business instinct of his grandfather, Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, nor the expansion-minded approach of his father and elder brothers. William Henry Vanderbilt, who had doubled the family fortune left by the Commodore, died in 1885 when George was only 23 years old. The inheritance was staggering. George received approximately $10 million outright, equivalent to roughly $300 million today, with expectations of additional income from various trust arrangements. Unlike his brothers Cornelius II and William Kissam, who dove enthusiastically into managing railroads and expanding business empires, George possessed fundamentally different inclinations. From childhood, George demonstrated an intellectual curiosity that set him apart from typical Gilded Age plutocrats. While other wealthy young men pursued social prominence through conspicuous consumption and high-profile marriages, George immersed himself in literature, languages, art, and philosophy. By his early 20s, he had become fluent in 8 languages, including French, German, Italian, and Spanish. His private library would eventually contain more than 23,000 volumes, many of them rare first editions and ancient manuscripts that he personally selected during his extensive European travels. George's education, though privileged, was thorough and genuinely scholarly. Unlike many wealthy heirs who attended university primarily for social connections, George pursued knowledge with authentic passion. He studied under private tutors who recognized and cultivated his intellectual gifts. His interests ranged from classical literature and philosophy to contemporary science, architecture, and the emerging field of forestry management. He collected not merely for status, but with the discerning eye of a true connoisseur who understood historical context and artistic merit. Physically, George cut a distinguished, if not imposing, figure. Standing approximately 5 feet 10 inches with dark hair, a well-trimmed beard in the fashion of the era, and thoughtful eyes, he possessed a quiet dignity rather than commanding presence. Contemporary accounts consistently described him as reserved, courteous, and exceptionally well-mannered, a gentleman in the truest sense of the word. He lacked the bombastic personality of many Gilded Age tycoons, preferring intimate gatherings with intellectuals and artists to grand society balls. This introspective nature, however, should not be mistaken for weakness or indecision. When George conceived of an idea, he pursued it with meticulous determination and unlimited resources. His approach combined scholarly thoroughness with the Vanderbilt capacity for thinking on a monumental scale. The construction of Biltmore would demonstrate this unique combination. The refined sensibilities of a cultivated aesthete merged with the audacious ambition characteristic of America's great industrial families. George's relationship with his family was complex. His mother, Maria Louisa, remained a significant influence throughout his life, and his siblings, while pursuing different paths, generally supported his unconventional interests. His brother William Kissam built the famous Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, and another brother, Cornelius II, constructed the Breakers, also in Newport. These massive cottages demonstrated the family's commitment to architectural grandeur, yet George's vision would ultimately surpass them all in scale and ambition. The young Vanderbilt heir was also deeply influenced by the progressive era ideas circulating among educated Americans during the 1880s. Concepts of scientific forestry, sustainable land management, model villages for workers, and the responsibilities of wealth were gaining traction in intellectual circles. George absorbed these ideas during his extensive reading and travels, and they would profoundly shape his approach to developing the Biltmore estate. European inspirations and the birth of a vision. George Vanderbilt's frequent European travels during the 1880s proved formative in developing the vision that would become Biltmore. Unlike the typical grand tour undertaken by wealthy Americans, a superficial survey of major cities and famous landmarks, George's European sojourns were intensive educational experiences. He studied architecture systematically, visiting not just the obvious palaces and chateaux, but also examining construction techniques, spatial arrangements, and the relationship between buildings and their surrounding landscapes. The chateau of France's Loire Valley particularly captivated George's imagination. These Renaissance masterpieces, Chambord, Chenonceau, Blois, Amboise, represented a harmonious blend of medieval fortress traditions and Renaissance humanism. They combined defensive architectural elements with elegant living spaces, massive scale with refined detail, and formal gardens with natural landscapes. George spent weeks examining these structures, sketching details, studying floor plans, and imagining how such architectural magnificence might be adapted to an American context. Beyond architecture, George absorbed European approaches to estate management. He observed how great landowners in England, France, and Germany managed vast properties, combining productive agriculture, scientific forestry, and aesthetic landscapes. The English country estate tradition, in particular, demonstrated how massive landholdings could serve multiple purposes, generating revenue through farming and timber, providing recreational opportunities, supporting local communities, and offering spaces of refined beauty for the owner's enjoyment. The concept of scientific forestry, pioneered in German lands and increasingly adopted throughout Europe, especially fascinated George. In Europe, forests were not merely exploited for immediate profit, but managed as long-term resources, with careful attention to replanting, selective harvesting, and ecosystem health. This stood in stark contrast to American forestry practices of the 1880s, which generally involved clear-cutting without regard for sustainability. George began envisioning an American estate that would demonstrate European forestry principles, combining productivity with conservation. During these travels, George also developed relationships with European craftsmen, artists, and architects. He visited workshops, studied traditional building techniques that were disappearing even in Europe, and began assembling the network of experts who would eventually bring his vision to life. He purchased artworks, architectural elements, and decorative objects that would later grace Biltmore, always with an eye toward creating a coherent aesthetic vision rather than merely accumulating trophies. The birth of George's specific vision for a mountain estate in North Carolina emerged from several converging factors. First, his mother, Maria Louisa Vanderbilt, suffered from malaria and had been advised by physicians to seek healthier climates. The mountain regions of western North Carolina were gaining reputation as health destinations, with clean air, moderate temperatures, and mineral springs. George had accompanied his mother on a visit to Asheville in 1888, and the region's combination of mountain beauty and temperate climate immediately appealed to him. Second, George recognized an opportunity unique to America. In Europe, the great estates had developed over centuries, with layers of history embedded in every stone. In North Carolina's mountains, George could create something unprecedented, a European-scale estate built from scratch, incorporating the finest architectural and landscape design principles, situated in a landscape of extraordinary natural beauty that was still largely undeveloped. He could realize, in its purest form, an integrated vision of architecture, landscape, and scientific land management. Third, the practical economics were favorable. Land in western North Carolina was relatively inexpensive in the late 1880s. The region had been devastated by the Civil War, and its remote location meant that land prices remained low compared to more accessible areas. For a relatively modest expenditure, by Vanderbilt standards, George could acquire thousands of acres, providing the scale necessary for his vision. The land itself was in poor condition. Much of it had been over-farmed or stripped of timber. But this actually suited George's purposes, as it would allow him to demonstrate land restoration and scientific management principles. By 1888, George's vision had crystallized. He would create a self-sustaining estate of unprecedented scale in the North Carolina mountains. It would feature a mansion rivaling the great chateau of France, surrounded by scientifically managed forests, productive farms, model villages for workers, and landscapes of both formal and natural beauty. The estate would serve simultaneously as a private residence, a demonstration of progressive land management, and ultimately a contribution to American culture and conservation. This vision was audacious beyond measure. No comparable estate existed in America. The scale alone would be revolutionary. George envisioned acquiring more than 100,000 acres, an area larger than many European principalities. The costs would be astronomical, the logistical challenges immense, and the cultural precedent non-existent. Yet George possessed the resources, the determination, and the intellectual sophistication to attempt it. The only question remaining was whether such a vision could actually be realized. Asheville, North Carolina, land of peace and potential. In 1888, when George Vanderbilt first arrived in Asheville, North Carolina, he discovered a region of extraordinary natural beauty undergoing rapid transformation. Asheville itself was a modest mountain town of approximately 10,000 residents, but it was beginning to attract attention as a health resort and tourist destination. The completion of the Western North Carolina Railroad in 1880 had finally connected these isolated mountains to the broader American economy, opening possibilities that had been impossible just a decade earlier. The landscape surrounding Asheville possessed a distinctive character that immediately appealed to George's aesthetic sensibilities. The Blue Ridge and Great Smoky Mountains created dramatic vistas, with layers of ridges fading into blue haze distance, the effect that gave the Blue Ridge its name. The French Broad River Valley provided relatively flat land suitable for building, while the surrounding mountains offered both magnificent views and protection from harsh weather. The elevation, ranging from 2,000 to over 6,000 feet, moderated summer heat while avoiding the most severe winter conditions of higher elevations. The climate was genuinely exceptional. Asheville's location created a temperate microclimate with 4 distinct but moderate seasons. Summers were cooler than the lowland south, with temperatures rarely exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Winters were mild compared to northern latitudes at similar elevations, with average temperatures remaining above freezing. Rainfall was abundant, supporting lush vegetation, while the mountain air remained clear and dry enough to benefit those suffering from respiratory ailments, a significant consideration in an era when tuberculosis remained a major health threat. The region's vegetation reflected this favorable climate. Mixed hardwood forests dominated the lower elevations, with oak, hickory, poplar, and maple creating spectacular fall colors. Higher elevations featured conifer forests of spruce and fir. Mountain laurel and rhododendron created dense understories, blooming spectacularly in late spring. The botanical diversity was extraordinary. The southern Appalachians are recognized today as one of the most biodiverse temperate regions on Earth, though this was not fully understood in the 1880s. However, the land itself had suffered severely from human exploitation. Western North Carolina had been settled primarily by subsistence farmers of Scots-Irish and German descent who had moved into the mountains in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. These families had cleared land through slash-and-burn agriculture, planting corn on steep slopes without regard for erosion. By the 1880s, much of the accessible land was exhausted, with topsoil washed away and productivity declining. Abandoned fields scarred the hillsides, and eroded gullies marked every watercourse. The situation was worsened by exploitative timber harvesting. As railroads penetrated the mountains, lumber companies began clear-cutting the virgin forests that had stood for centuries. The most valuable trees, black walnut, cherry, oak, were taken first, but gradually, every marketable species was harvested. The practice was pure extraction, with no thought of sustainability. Entire mountainsides were stripped bare, leaving erosion, flooding, and ecological devastation in their wake. For George Vanderbilt, this degradation represented both challenge and opportunity. The landscape's poor condition meant that land could be acquired relatively cheaply. Small farmers who had exhausted their holdings were often willing to sell for modest sums. Timber companies, having stripped the most valuable trees, would sell cut-over land for pennies per acre. George began quietly purchasing properties, working through agents to avoid driving up prices through speculation. The local economy was struggling, which also worked in George's favor. The Civil War had devastated the South, and western North Carolina's remote location meant that Reconstruction-era recovery had been slow. Most residents lived in poverty by national standards, though they maintained the fierce independence characteristic of mountain communities. Employment opportunities were scarce, so George's eventual construction project would be welcomed as a source of desperately needed wages. The social context was also important. Asheville's emerging role as a health resort meant that wealthy visitors were not entirely unknown in the region, reducing the culture shock of a Vanderbilt presence. Several sanitariums and resort hotels had been established, creating a small but sophisticated urban core in Asheville itself. The Battery Park Hotel, opened in 1886, provided accommodations suitable for affluent visitors. Local business leaders understood the economic potential of attracting more wealthy residents and tourists, and they would generally support George's ambitious plans. The legal and political environment was favorable as well. North Carolina's government, controlled by Democrats who represented business-friendly interests, welcomed major capital investment. Property taxes were minimal, environmental regulations non-existent, and labor laws virtually absent. George would face few bureaucratic obstacles to his plans, and local authorities would prove consistently supportive of his endeavors. George's initial land acquisitions began modestly in 1888 and 1889. He purchased small farms and timber tracts, gradually assembling a core holding south of Asheville along the French Broad River. The land included a variety of terrain: river bottom land suitable for agriculture, rolling hills appropriate for formal gardens and building sites, and mountain slopes that could be reforested. By 1889, George had acquired approximately 2,000 acres and was ready to begin the serious planning phase of his estate. The physical challenges were substantial. The land lacked infrastructure. Roads were primitive or non-existent. There was no railway spur to the property, no electric power, no telephone service, and no water system beyond natural springs and creeks. Everything would need to be created from scratch. Yet these very challenges appealed to George's systematic mind. He could design and implement a complete, integrated system without being constrained by existing structures or compromised by previous poor decisions. Restoring 125,000 acres, scientific forestry begins. One of George Vanderbilt's most forward-thinking decisions was his commitment to scientific forestry and land restoration on a scale unprecedented in American history. While the mansion would become Biltmore's most visible feature, the forest restoration and management program represented a more profound and lasting contribution to American conservation practices. By 1890, George had expanded his land acquisitions to approximately 7,000 acres, but he envisioned a much larger holding, eventually exceeding 125,000 acres at its maximum extent in the early 1900s. Most of this land was in deplorable condition. Decades of exploitative farming and timber harvesting had left the landscape scarred, eroded, and biologically degraded. Mountain streams ran muddy with topsoil. Wildlife populations had been decimated by hunting and habitat destruction. The forest that remained consisted mainly of stunted second growth and pioneer species. George understood that restoring this landscape would require expertise beyond anything available in late 19th century America. Forestry as a scientific discipline barely existed in the United States at this time. The prevailing attitude viewed forests as obstacles to progress or resources to be exploited as quickly as possible. The concept of managing forests for long-term sustained yield, common in Europe, was virtually unknown in America. To address this knowledge gap, George commissioned Gifford Pinchot in 1892. Pinchot, then only 27 years old, had recently returned from studying forestry in France and Germany, making him one of the only Americans with formal training in scientific forestry. Pinchot's appointment as Biltmore's forester represented a watershed moment in American conservation history. It was the first time scientific forestry principles would be applied to a large-scale American forest management program. Pinchot's approach was revolutionary for its time. Rather than simply protecting forests from any use, as the nascent preservation movement advocated, or exploiting them for maximum short-term profit, as was standard practice, Pinchot implemented management principles that balanced economic productivity with long-term forest health. He conducted systematic surveys to assess forest conditions, identifying which areas needed immediate protection, which could sustain carefully managed harvesting, and which required active restoration. The restoration work began immediately and was conducted on multiple fronts. First, erosion control was essential. Pinchot's teams constructed check dams and gullies to slow water flow and trap sediment, allowing topsoil to accumulate. They planted erosion-resistant species on the most degraded slopes. They closed and revegetated old logging roads that were contributing to erosion. This unglamorous but essential work stabilized watersheds and began the slow process of soil rebuilding. Second, reforestation efforts targeted areas that had been completely denuded. Nurseries were established on the estate to grow seedlings of native species: oaks, chestnuts, poplars, hickories, and pines. Workers planted millions of trees over the following decades, focusing on matching species to appropriate sites based on soil conditions, elevation, and moisture levels. This was scientific forestry in action, not simply planting trees randomly, but creating mixed species forests that would be ecologically resilient and economically productive. Third, existing forest areas received careful management. Pinchot implemented selective cutting rather than clear cutting, removing mature trees while leaving younger specimens to continue growth. He marked trees for harvest based on species, size, health, and the forest's overall composition, ensuring that timber harvesting improved rather than degraded forest quality. This approach was so novel that local woodsmen initially resisted, unable to comprehend why they shouldn't simply cut every marketable tree. The economic dimension was crucial to the program's sustainability. George understood that the forest restoration must eventually become self-supporting rather than remaining a permanent drain on his fortune. Pinchot designed the management system to generate revenue through sustainable timber sales, hunting leases, and other forest products. A sawmill was constructed on the estate to process timber, and eventually a small industrial village grew around forest operations, providing employment for local residents. Pinchot's scientific approach extended to detailed record-keeping and experimentation. He maintained meticulous data on tree growth rates, harvest volumes, replanting success, and costs. He experimented with different silvicultural techniques, testing European methods and adapting them to American species and conditions. This data would prove invaluable not just for Biltmore's management, but for the broader development of American forestry. The scale of the operation was immense. At its height, the forestry program employed hundreds of workers. Roads and trails had to be constructed throughout the vast property to enable management activities. Fire towers were built to spot and combat forest fires, which posed constant threats to restoration efforts. Boundary lines had to be surveyed and maintained across more than 125,000 acres of rugged mountain terrain. Wildlife management began as well, though it was less systematic than forest management. George prohibited hunting on the estate, allowing wildlife populations to recover from decades of overhunting. Deer, bear, wild turkey, and other species gradually returned. Fish populations in estate streams improved as erosion control and reforestation reduced siltation. While not as scientifically rigorous as the forestry program, these conservation measures contributed to ecosystem restoration. The forest restoration program faced numerous challenges. Local residents, accustomed to treating forests as commons for hunting, wood gathering, and free-range livestock grazing, sometimes resented the restriction of their traditional practices. Poaching remained a persistent problem. Some locals viewed George's conservation efforts as effete foolishness, city boy ideas that ignored mountain realities. Yet the employment opportunities the estate provided, along with George's generally respectful treatment of local culture, gradually won acceptance. Gifford Pinchot left Biltmore in 1895 to pursue broader conservation work, eventually becoming the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service under President Theodore Roosevelt. His successor at Biltmore was Dr. Carl Alwin Schenk, a German forester who had trained at the prestigious Forest Academy in Darmstadt. Schenk continued and expanded Pinchot's work, establishing the Biltmore Forest School in 1898, the first school of forestry in the United States. The Biltmore Forest School represented another pioneering contribution to American conservation. Schenk trained foresters in scientific principles, combining classroom instruction with practical field experience in Biltmore's forests. Between 1898 and 1913, when the school closed, it graduated over 300 foresters who carried scientific forestry principles throughout America. Many became leaders in the U.S. Forest Service and state forestry programs, making Biltmore a fountainhead of American forestry practice. The long-term vision for the forests proved remarkably successful. The degraded landscapes that George had acquired slowly transformed into healthy, productive forests. By the early 20th century, Biltmore's forests were yielding sustainable timber harvests, while visibly improving in health and diversity. The model demonstrated that economic productivity and ecological restoration could be compatible goals, a radical concept at the time, but one that would become foundational to modern sustainable forestry. George's commitment to forest restoration also reflected broader progressive era ideals about the responsible use of wealth. Rather than simply extracting resources for maximum profit or creating a private playground, George invested his fortune in demonstrating sustainable practices that could benefit society broadly. The forests would outlast him, providing value to future generations, a form of stewardship that contrasted sharply with the exploitative capitalism characteristic of much Gilded Age wealth. Commissioning the best, Hunt and Olmsted, George Vanderbilt's approach to creating his estate reflected his scholarly temperament. He sought out the finest experts in each discipline and gave them the resources and autonomy to execute his vision at the highest level. Two figures would prove especially crucial in translating George's European-inspired dreams into American reality: architect Richard Morris Hunt and landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. Richard Morris Hunt was the obvious choice for architect. Born in 1827, Hunt was the first American to study architecture at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the world's most prestigious architectural school. After returning to the United States in the 1850s, he had become the leading architect for America's wealthiest families, designing mansions, public buildings, and monuments that introduced Beaux-Arts grandeur to American shores. His previous work included the Breakers in Newport, for George's brother Cornelius Vanderbilt II, Marble House in Newport, for George's brother William Kissam Vanderbilt, and the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty. Hunt was in his early 60s when George commissioned him to design Biltmore House in 1889. He brought not only architectural brilliance but also practical experience in translating European architectural traditions for American clients and conditions. Hunt understood how to adapt Renaissance and medieval design principles to accommodate modern American life, how to work with American construction materials and methods, and how to manage the complex logistics of building enormous structures in challenging locations. George gave Hunt remarkable freedom, providing only general guidance about the style, French Renaissance chateau, and the desired grandeur. Hunt threw himself into the project with enthusiasm, recognizing it as potentially the crowning achievement of his career. He traveled with George to France, studying the chateau that inspired the design, sketching architectural details, measuring proportions, and absorbing the essential character of French Renaissance architecture. The design that emerged drew primarily from three Loire Valley chateaux: Blois, Chenonceau, and Chambord. From Blois, Hunt borrowed elements of François I's wing, particularly the grand staircase and facade treatment. From Chenonceau, he adapted the graceful elegance and integration with the surrounding landscape. From Chambord, he took inspiration for the massive scale and elaborate roofline with its distinctive French towers and chimneys. Yet Hunt didn't simply copy. He synthesized these influences into an original design that was unmistakably French in character, yet specifically adapted to its American context and purpose. The building's footprint was staggering. The main house alone would cover more than 4 acres. The plan included 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces. The structure would rise 4 stories, with basement service areas, ground floor public rooms, second floor family bedrooms, third floor guest rooms, and fourth floor servants' quarters. The exterior would feature Indiana limestone, chosen for its durability and workability, rather than the softer French limestone. The distinctive roofline, steeply pitched and bristling with dormers, chimneys, and decorative elements, would be clad in slate. Hunt's design brilliantly balanced authentic French Renaissance architecture with modern American technology and comfort. The exterior maintained historical accuracy in proportions, detailing, and decorative elements. The interior layout, however, was adapted for modern living, with wide corridors for convenience, large windows for natural light, and spaces carefully planned for their intended functions rather than simply replicating French palace layouts. Frederick Law Olmsted, engaged to design the grounds and landscape, brought equally impressive credentials. By 1889, Olmsted was America's preeminent landscape architect, having designed Central Park and Prospect Park in New York, the U.S. Capitol grounds, and numerous other projects. He had pioneered landscape architecture as a profession in America, elevating it from mere gardening to a sophisticated art combining aesthetic vision, horticultural knowledge, and social purpose. Olmsted was 67 years old when he took on the Biltmore project, but his creative powers remained strong. He immediately recognized both the extraordinary potential and the significant challenges of the site. The natural scenery was magnificent, but the degraded condition of the land required extensive restoration before landscape design could even begin. Olmsted approached the project holistically, envisioning how the managed landscape around the house would transition gradually into the restored forests beyond, creating a unified aesthetic experience from the most formal gardens to the wildest woodland. Olmsted's plan addressed multiple scales and purposes. Immediately around the house, he designed formal gardens in styles appropriate to a French chateau, a walled garden, an Italian garden, and a ramble with naturalistic plantings. These formal areas would provide spaces for recreation and aesthetic enjoyment while demonstrating horticultural excellence. Beyond the immediate house grounds, Olmsted designed the approach road, a 3-mile journey through the estate that would transform visitors' experience from the bustle of Asheville to the tranquility of the estate. The approach road demonstrated Olmsted's genius. Rather than a straight line to the house, the road wound through the landscape, carefully orchestrated to reveal views gradually and build anticipation. It crossed the French Broad River on a specially designed bridge, passed through restored woodlands, skirted meadows, and finally approached the house at an angle that revealed the building's grandeur without overwhelming the visitor. Every curve, every vista, every planting was deliberately planned to create a specific aesthetic and emotional experience. Olmsted also planned the estate's infrastructure, including roads, water systems, and even the location of the estate village where workers would live. He understood that practical necessities like service access and drainage must be integrated into the overall design rather than added as afterthoughts. This comprehensive approach, treating the entire estate as a unified design challenge, demonstrated Olmsted's sophisticated understanding of landscape architecture as an art form that encompassed both aesthetic and functional concerns. The working relationship between Hunt, Olmsted, and Vanderbilt was remarkable for its mutual respect and collaboration. George deferred to his expert's judgment on technical and artistic matters while clearly articulating his overall vision and expectations. Hunt and Olmsted, despite being strong personalities with definite opinions, worked together effectively, coordinating the architecture and landscape to create a unified whole. Regular meetings and correspondence ensured that decisions about the house considered landscape implications and vice versa. Both professionals brought teams of skilled assistants who would play crucial roles in executing the designs. Hunt's office in New York developed detailed architectural drawings and specifications. Olmsted's firm in Brookline, Massachusetts, run increasingly by his son Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., as the elder Olmsted's health declined, produced planting plans, grading specifications, and infrastructure designs. These documents, numbering in the thousands of pages, provided the detailed guidance necessary for construction. The selection of Hunt and Olmsted represented more than hiring competent professionals. It was a statement of George's commitment to creating something of genuine artistic merit rather than mere ostentation. Both men were at the pinnacle of their professions, with reputations based on excellence rather than fashion. Both shared George's appreciation for historical precedent combined with modern innovation. Both understood that great architecture and landscape design should serve human needs while elevating human experience. Tragically, neither Hunt nor Olmsted would live to see Biltmore completed in its mature state. Hunt died in 1895, just as the house was being finished, though he witnessed its essential completion. Olmsted's health declined throughout the 1890s. He would suffer mental illness and die in 1903 before many of his plantings had matured. Yet their contributions to Biltmore were definitive and enduring. The estate remains a testament to their artistic vision and professional excellence, demonstrating what could be achieved when visionary patronage met consummate skill. Building the real thing. Authentic French Renaissance. The actual construction of Biltmore House between 1889 and 1895 represented an organizational and logistical achievement as remarkable as the architectural design itself. Building a massive chateau in the remote mountains of North Carolina, far from established centers of skilled craftsmanship and material supply, required extraordinary planning, persistence, and expenditure. The first challenge was preparing the site. The location Hunt and Olmsted selected, a plateau overlooking the French Broad River with views to distant mountains, required extensive grading and preparation. Thousands of cubic yards of earth had to be moved to create level building pads and properly drain the site. Retaining walls were constructed to create terraces and address the sloping terrain. All this had to be accomplished with horse-drawn equipment and manual labor, as steam shovels and similar machinery were impractical in the location. The foundation work alone took more than a year. Because of the building's enormous weight and the importance of ensuring its stability for centuries to come, the foundations were massively over-engineered by contemporary standards. They extended deep into the bedrock in some areas and consisted of massive stone and concrete footings in others. The basement level, which would house service areas and mechanical systems, was essentially a separate stone building beneath the main structure. Materials presented constant challenges. The Indiana limestone for the exterior walls had to be quarried in southern Indiana, cut to specification, loaded onto rail cars, shipped to Asheville, then transported by wagon to the building site, a journey of more than 600 miles. Brick, needed for interior walls and chimneys, was manufactured on site in estate kilns, but the necessary clay had to be located and tested first. Slate for the roof came from Virginia. Structural steel, a relatively new building material used for interior supports, came from Pennsylvania foundries. The timber required for floors, interior framing, paneling, and trim was harvested from Biltmore's own forests, but had to be properly seasoned before use, a process taking months to years depending on the species and intended purpose. A sawmill on the estate processed logs, but skilled millwork required for decorative elements was contracted to specialized firms. Creating a railway spur to the construction site proved essential. In 1890, a branch line was extended from the main Western North Carolina Railroad to the estate, enabling direct delivery of materials and equipment. This 3-mile spur line represented a major investment, but without it, construction would have been impossibly slow and expensive. The spur line eventually terminated at what would become the estate village, where workshops, warehouses, and worker housing were constructed. The workforce during peak construction numbered more than 1,000 men. The majority were local laborers performing unskilled or semi-skilled work, excavating, hauling materials, mixing mortar, and similar tasks. These men earned typical wages for the region, 75 cents to $1.50 per day, which represented good money in an area with few employment alternatives. The work was hard and dangerous by modern standards, with injuries and occasional fatalities occurring despite reasonable precautions. Skilled craftsmen came from farther afield. Stone masons, bricklayers, carpenters, and plasters with experience in large-scale construction were recruited from northern cities, especially New York and Philadelphia. These specialists commanded much higher wages, $3 to $5 per day or more for master craftsmen, and often brought their own tools and techniques. Some came for short periods to execute specific tasks. Others stayed for years as the project demanded their specializations. The most skilled artisans came from Europe, as discussed in the next section. But even before they arrived, American craftsmen were executing complex work requiring substantial skill. The stone walls, for instance, were not simply stacked, but carefully dressed and fitted, with each stone cut to precise specifications. The brickwork for chimneys and interior walls had to meet exacting standards for both strength and appearance. The timber framing required traditional joinery techniques rarely used in contemporary construction. Coordinating this workforce presented major management challenges. Richard Morris Hunt's firm provided overall architectural supervision, with Hunt himself visiting the site regularly to inspect progress and make decisions about details. His son, Richard Howland Hunt, also an architect, spent extensive time on-site serving as clerk of works, the person responsible for day-to-day construction oversight. A construction superintendent managed the practical aspects of workforce deployment, material flow, and scheduling. The construction proceeded methodically through a series of phases. Foundation work occupied 1889 and early 1890. The main stone walls rose during 1890 and 1891, with the structure reaching full height by 1892. Roof construction occurred in 1892 and 1893, an especially challenging phase because of the complex French roof design with its multiple levels, dormers, and decorative elements. Interior construction consumed 1893, 1894, and early 1895, representing the most labor-intensive phase as rooms were finished with plaster, woodwork, flooring, and decorative elements.